So many different ways to deploy knives, so little time. One we're probably most familiar with is the thumb stud. Happen to be dual thumb studs on this medium-sized Cold Steel Voyager Intanto right here. Very commonly used on many different knives, and there's many variants of the thumb stud. I've seen them in very odd shapes, but these work, generally speaking, just cylindrical, kind of textured right there, help catch your thumb just a little bit better if you're using it that way, and they are ambidextrous. Cool. Another common opening mechanism on knives is the thumb hole. This one happens to be a circle shape. Spyderco Manix FRCP, love this knife. Very simple, it's literally just a cutout in the blade. And you use that to open up, no matter what finger you're using. I typically use my thumb, like most people do. So it happens to be cut at 90 degrees, so it catches your thumb very easily. It's very sharp. Although there are variants on that, sometimes they're rounded. Next up, we got the flipper. Probably familiar with this guy right here. It's just a little protrusion of the blade that pokes out of the spine of the handle. And you can use, usually it's just your index finger, but you can use whatever finger you want. Sometimes on certain models you can use your thumb, like just barely got it to work there. And sometimes you don't have to touch the blade at all with an automatic knife or even a button lock knife. This is a button lock knife that has a coil spring in it. If you take the coil spring out, it would function as a button lock knife. But otherwise, it is an automatic. Without even touching the blade at all, you release the tension or release the lock, forcing on the blade, and then the spring forces it out if you depress it right there. And then from here, you have subcategories of each, pretty much. So for example, on the thumb stud point of view, we have thumb plates, like this Cold Steel Raja 3 right here. It's, of all of these opening mechanisms right here, it's closest to this guy, even though it's quite different. At the same time, it's pretty much the same thing, though. You just use your thumb or whatever finger to push against it, and then it opens up the blade. Very simple. Just instead of it being on top of the surface of the blade, it's on the spine. And then, of course, you can change the shape of that. You can have it protrude out more. Is there an advantage to this? Well, the big thing for me is the fact that if it's shaped this way, it can be waved off of the pocket. You can snag it on your pocket. Deploying it as you pull it out of your pocket is faster than pulling out of your pocket or extracting it and then opening it up. Although some people argue against that. I'm not going to get into a whole rant on that, but that's one advantage these thumb plates have. And then another thing is that they don't take up as much surface area on the blade. So for this knife, it doesn't really matter, but for some knives that are very, very slim, like the CRKT Otanashi no Ken, the thumb plate or thumb disc, I guess in this case you could call that, you can fit such a flush blade. It almost goes completely flush underneath the handle. Right? There's a very skinny blade. Instead of poking out, like, I don't know, this, the blade pokes out a lot farther beyond the handle right there. It's almost completely flush, other than this area right here, obviously. You could fit a thumb stud right there, but it would be kind of a tricky fit, I would say. In this case, the thumb disc is a lot more appropriate because it just gives you a little bit of extra space right there while keeping the rest of the blade flush underneath the handle and not having to widen it out as much. That is one disadvantage you could argue with the thumb holes, is that you have to have it protrude out a lot more if you wanted it to be fully exposed right there. So you're going to have a wider knife in the pocket. Does it matter to me much? No, because when it's in the pocket this way, I don't carry other things along my pocket. That's the only time I would want a knife to be slimmer. Now, if you're talking thickness of the handle, that's different. Yeah, that takes up more space in your pocket, but this way, it doesn't bother me at all. However, some people are bothered by that. They don't want their knives to be super wide or even like this. But with the thumb disc and the thumb plates, you can save some space that way. Is there any other advantage to that? Other than waving the knife off the pocket like the thumb plate can, this thumb disc, even though they're kind of in the same category, they're kind of not. Similar, they both are along the spine, but this is just shaped a little bit differently and it cannot be waved. I can't. Maybe you could get it to wave if you did it on just the right angle, but it would not work very well. It's not intended to be on this knife anyway, other than it saving some space. If anything, it's slightly more annoying to open up. On this knife, the way it's executed, it's not a big deal, but there's just a little bit less surface area on the top of it right there for your thumb to catch. Again, not a really big deal. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying in comparison to a typical thumb stud, it's just, I don't know what it is. The fact that the shape of it changes on the very top surface of it as it is rotating just feels kind of odd to me. You have to kind of adjust your thumb as you are opening it up to get full contact on there. And then flicking it open, you're technically pushing on against less material, but it's so subtle. It's really not a big deal. The thumb stud is kind of the end-all, be-all, always works of all of the opening mechanisms that you would attach to a blade. I think the thumb stud's pretty much the favorite. That's why it's so commonly used. But there are some advantages and disadvantages, thumb plates, thumb discs, whatever you want to call them. These are pretty much in a different category, because a thumb hole is not an attached piece onto the blade, it is a cutout directly in the blade. That's different. And then you have a flipper, which is part of the blade. It's not attached to the blade, it's just the way the knife is shaped. It's not an extra piece attached to it, like I said. Just a little bit different. Instead of using your thumb in this area, you're using your index finger back here. Advantage? Nothing in particular other than the fact that, let's say if your thumb's injured, maybe you don't have a thumb, I don't know, if it's just more difficult to use your thumb, it's broken, whatever, you can use your index finger. Vice versa, if you can't flip open a knife with your index finger because it's injured or missing, whatever, you can step down to one of these, or a thumb hole, thumb stud, thumb disc, thumb plate. So that's kind of just a difference. I don't think these flippers are better or worse than the thumb opening knives. I don't see a problem with them. They're either open or they're closed. A lot more simple. There's less fumbling around. It's more just you move your index finger, bang, it opens up, if the knife is executed properly. One disadvantage to flippers is that you can't really open them conventionally. It's either open or it's shut. There's no in between. There's no kind of slowly opening it, adjusting your hand a little bit, then getting it locked open. With these, you can flip them open fast, and some are easier to do than others. This one's pretty easy. Just the way it's designed, the way the detent's in there, etc. Perfect. Flippers, you pretty much don't have an option. It's either open or it's shut. But you can consider that an advantage. You know, if you don't want to fumble around, if you're in a stressful situation, you don't want it to be half open and then accidentally slice your fingers while you're trying to get it open, etc. Because the way they're designed, the flippers are either open or they're shut. Less versatile, cannot open them conventionally. They're kind of almost approaching assisted knives in a sense. Not that they're assisted by any means, I'm just saying they're either open or they're shut. Less versatile, but more simple. Maybe that's what you want. This is just an example of a knife that you do not touch the blade at all. You touch a separate mechanism on the handle. But now it's illegal in some areas, so as far as legalities go, this one is going to lose in comparison to the other knives. Are there any other advantages? It depends on your preferences. It depends on how your hand is functioning, what you're used to, what you like. Not really a big deal. It's just another method of opening them. There are some knives that are not automatic that you can also open without touching the blade. Like, for example, with a side actuating locking mechanism, like this right here, the Ultra Lock. Sorry, kind of a fail right there, but same thing with the Spyderco Cage Ball bearing lock right here. Not touching the blade at all. It almost works like a button lock. A little less simple. You gotta practice with it a little bit more, but it works just about the same. Same thing with the Ultra Lock right here. And then, of course, you have knives that have a mixture of multiple things. This CRKT BT Fighter is extremely versatile. It's got thumb studs on there. You can see they're shaped a little differently than the Cold Steel, the Voyager. A little bit more cone-shaped at the tip, but they work just fine. You can use the fat of your thumb to open the knife up conventionally, or the tip of it to flick it open. Very simple. You also have a flipper right here. Fail on the first open. There we go. So you can use either one, and you have a button lock right here, so you can open it up without touching the blade at all. So all three ways of opening it up. If you can't decide, you can get something like this. Cool. And then, of course, there's flipper knives that also have thumb holes in them, not just the thumb studs. We didn't just limit it to that, did we? Honey Badger right here, amazing folder. You can flip it, and you can use the thumb hole if you want. Win-win. It's not a thumb circle. It's a different shape. It's almost like half circle, but it's very rounded on the edges. It's not quite as sharp as the thumb hole right here on the Spyderco. Speaking of which, I got a few others I can show you right here. This thumb hole on this Gerber flat iron is not even a circle. It's like an odd trapezoid shape, but also rounded on the edges. But guess what? It actually works pretty good. It's not as easy to get to as the wider patterns, like right here. In fact, it's extremely slim, but it works good enough. It's an oval shape on the CRKT Boku, rounded on the edges as well, so it's more comfortable, quote unquote. A little bit more comfortable to deploy, but not as easy to deploy because it's less sharp. That's kind of the trade-off there. But if you prefer that, if you don't want a really, really sharp edge on the thumb hole, you can get something like this that's more rounded. And then you have very bizarre kind of stylistic holes right here. It's not a circle. It's not quite as functional as most of the other holes we're seeing right here. It's supposed to kind of mimic a dinosaur eye on the CRKT Fossil right here. But it works. Does it work well? Not really. I have to kind of pinch all the way down here with my thumb to get it started, because otherwise the way the detent has this knife has a very strong detent actually, so it doesn't work very well, but I normally just flip this knife open with the flipper anyway. Yeah, thumb plates, thumb discs, thumb studs, thumb holes, flippers, or side actuating mechanisms. Which one do you prefer? Do you have a preference at all? Can you think of any advantages or disadvantages any of these have that I missed? Personally, if I had to pick one, just one, honestly, I think I'd go with the thumb hole. The thumb hole is a relatively new piece of technology on folding knives. I know that sounds ridiculous. It's just a cutout in the blade. Who cares, right? But actually, no, it's nothing to be laughed at. They're extremely functional. I think they really catch your thumb better than any other mechanism right here on the table. Just because, especially this one, because it's so sharp, it's just on a 90-degree angle. The circle never changes its pattern. It never changes its shape in comparison to where your thumb is, depending on where you are opening it, where the blade is located, as you can see right there as it pivots around. Again, when you go with something with a shape, something like this, anything other than a circle, pretty much its shape is technically going to change as it rotates around. So it will change its shape, although the tip of your thumb doesn't really change. It's just, it remains in the same position pretty much, more or less. So it can feel a little awkward. It's not a big deal. I'm kind of nitpicking here, but I'm just saying it doesn't catch your thumb as effectively as something as simple as a circle. Your thumb tip just stays planted in there the entire time from the moment it's closed to the moment it hits that locking mechanism and opens up. That's why I love the thumb holes. They're very simple. It's just a circle. A circular shaped thumb hole specifically. That's my favorite way to open knives. It just catches your thumb easily. And not that this is a big deal, but you don't have to worry about a separate piece coming off, falling off of the knife, breaking off, loosening off, stripping off, ripping out. I've heard thumb plates ripping out because they're screwed in right there. It technically could be a weak point. Eventually this could fail one day, maybe. Not normally, but I've seen it happen on other people's knives. Same with these thumb discs, they're screwed in. It's a separate piece attached to the blade. Thumb hole is a piece taken away from the blade, so it's even more efficient than adding a separate piece to the blade. And then on top of that, you could argue it lightens up the knife. Yeah, instead of adding to it, you are taking away from it. Flippers are cool. They're fun to play around with. I like flipper knives. I have a handful of them myself. They're not my preference, but I'll use them once in a while. They seem a little bit more elegant to me, kind of fancier, a little bit more simple. You know, it's something you just, boop, you just use the finger tip right there and shoot it out. Very, very, so they're a lot more simple. I don't prefer them over thumb studs or thumb holes. If anything, I like them a little less. But if my thumb got injured or I sprained it or I did something weird with my thumb at work or whatever happened, my thumb just hurts like hell. I don't want to use it to open up my knife anymore. That's when I'll grab a flipper. That's what I like about keeping flippers around. Even just one flipper in your collection, even if you're not really a flipper guy, you can still have one. Or again, get a knife that has one of each. Best of both worlds. So if one finger, your thumb or your index finger is injured, you can use the other. Anyway, I just thought I'd give you a little bit more knife porn. Here, let's just show all the knives I have on the table here. Just have a nice little outro for you. Different shapes, different sizes, different colors, different blade steels, different companies. It's such a happy family.